Hello, this is Paul Johnson with the Optimistic American. My guest today is with Stand With Us, which is an organization that is designed or focused on trying to make certain that people understand the facts of what's happening on the ground in Israel. Our guest, Martin Jannol, is both their General Counsel as well as the founder of this organization that has just flourished into a very large national organization. Now, one of the keys that I think that is going to come out of this interview that we hope to find is really trying to understand the facts. You know, we hear about Israel being a colonial nation, about them being an apartheid state. We hear about many of the things that are going on both the right and the left. You know, we sometimes forget that the right not too long ago was chanting, Jews will not replace us, literally 4 or 5 years ago in torchlit parades, all the way to what's happening on our university campuses today. This is a chance to try to gain an education and gain a better understanding of what really is happening. I think you'll enjoy it. We hope if you like what you hear, you'll press that subscribe button. Become one of our members, or if you really like what we're doing, become one of our actual premium members at optamerican.com/premium. Again, thanks for being with us. Now we're on to the show of the Optimistic American. All right, I'd like to welcome back to our show Dr. Emily Basha, as also a good friend of ours, Martin Jannol. Martin is involved in an organization that's called Stand With Us. We're going to talk about Israel this morning. Now, before we do, Marty, I'm not sure where you are. I'm in Phoenix. I'm wearing a coat because I think the wind chill factor is down to about 72 degrees here today, and I had a chill. So where are you today?
I'm in Los Angeles. I'm in Beverly Hills. In my office, and it was in the low 50s when I came in, but I don't feel it here, so it's fine. I don't need a jacket.
Yeah, we're lucky to be in the Southwest. And Emily, I know you're here in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, so we're actually kind of warm. But my office, for whatever reason, seems to get cold sometimes. Maybe we got to get this heater fixed here. All right, so here's the first question, Marty. Stand With Us as an organization. If you would, tell us a little bit about it. I know you were both a co-founder of that as well as being legal counsel to it today. Tell me a little bit about the organization.
Okay, so 6 couples met in a home in Cheviot Hills in 2001, in March of 2001. And we met to find a way to get the LA Times to be more fair and balanced towards Israel. And then 9/11 happened, and one of the founders' daughter was at UCLA, and she was experiencing some anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist pressure. And so we shifted the organization from a media organization to become an educational organization about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. We are among the top maybe 2 or 3 combatants of that. We have a large organization. We have 175 employees. We have offices all over the world. One of our departments is the legal department. We have 300 pro bono attorneys who take on cases that students have because they're professors or they're being intimidated by other students on campuses. And right now we have over 400 open cases at colleges all across the world, universities and high schools all over the world. And we're fighting the good fight. And the one thing I will tell you, which is probably the best way to start, is we're sort of modeled. Historically, Jews were silent. We got targeted and we were silent. And part of our motivation is the following. It's a poem by Pastor Martin Jannol, who was a pastor in Germany during the Nazi era. Here's what he writes. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And we basically are saying we're not going to be silent. We're not going to be just target practice. We're fighting back, and we're fighting back directly. And we don't care if you don't like it. But the one thing I want to say, and then I'll end it, we are not political. We don't take positions on any political issues. We are an educational organization, period. There are organizations that are pro-Palestinian that think of us as a right-wing organization, but we really aren't. If you look at our materials, that's just a way for them to try to manipulate reality, which is a theme that we're going to talk about here today.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Marty. Thank you so much for all the work that you and your wife are doing. I know that she's also a co-founder, and I so appreciate the commitment to the cause. Um, there's something Paul and I have been talking about this in the last several weeks about what is the right way to handle anti-Semitism on university campuses. And we started to talk about the Supreme Court rulings, and Paul can certainly talk more about his interaction with the Supreme Court when he was mayor, in trying to find a fair and just approach. And I think that this is a valid question. How can we still promote free speech and protect free speech as a civil right, and yet still, not promote anti-Semitism or educate people? What's the right answer for university campuses? What should we see leadership doing on university campuses today? And I think we're getting such a wide spectrum of responses that I'm quite shocked to see, like, how is this even possible in today's age? Just the level of anti-Semitism that is coming from professors, and how do they still maintain their job? How is that okay? And so all of that is quite concerning. I'm really interested to hear what Stand With Us is doing as a response to what we're seeing on university campuses.
Okay, Emily, that's a very compound question. Let me address several of the issues to try to get to it. So the first thing is, I'm a child of the 60s, and I was part of the protest movement against the Vietnam War. Fair enough. We protested. We sat in. We marched. We didn't wear masks because we weren't afraid of retribution because of what we did. We never threatened anybody with violence. We never did any of that. Okay, in fairness, there was a splinter group that was more aggressive, but the vast majority of us protested free speech. But free speech does not include intimidation, threats, and acts of violence. Okay, and we're seeing those things happening today on campuses across North America and in the world. So we step up, and we've already done this. We sent an open letter to virtually every college president demanding that they honor their own charters, which don't allow what's going on to go on. And this is controversial, and you guys can edit it out if you want. I will tell you, and I have And I think if what I'm talking about hypothetically actually happened, I think it would be okay. What's not okay is not to do the same thing for Jewish and pro-Zionist kids. And here's what the point is. If a group of Black students, African American students, protested and they were intimidated by their professors or other students, Klansmen, who cares? The colleges would be all over that. The presidents would be, this is unacceptable, period. And yet, it's not happening now. And so, Stand With Us is using its legal department, and we are actively going after universities, colleges, high schools that don't follow their own charters about non-discrimination, free speech, and proper conduct. And I don't want to get into the specifics, but we've been able to get the federal government to initiate Title VI investigations involving several universities, and one university in particular that's been targeted. If the federal government determines that they violated their own rules and violated Title VI, then they're going to lose $1 billion a year of federal money. Oh, shoot. So, Emily, the answer is we are not sitting quiet, and we're taking aggressive action to require institutions to follow their own rules.
That's amazing, Marty. Thank you.
So here's what's surprising to me. I think back to 5 years ago. 5 years ago, literally at Charlottesville, we had 1,000 young white men, literally with torches lit, that marched, that you can go online and see this, that said, Jews will not replace us. We had a president who said, there are good people on both sides. I would have never dreamed at that day that we might actually have a bigger problem with the radical left than we were having with the radical right. Now, the radical left, we had a college professor that said that he was exhilarated by what he saw on October the 7th. We're hearing from the river to the sea, which of course means we're going to march the Jews to the sea. We're going to exterminate them. What has become surprising to me, what's surprising to me the most is that literally we're in this position where we have a radical left that isn't far away from being the Proud Boys on the other side. Now, the universities, it seems to me the problem that they have, at least from my view of it, is that they've banned groups on the right. If the Proud Boys were to do that on their campus, they would ban them. They've banned groups on the right, like Ann Coulter can't speak. For that fact, Bill Maher can't speak. They chose a side. They said, that's wrong. But now when it's happening on the left, they're allowing it to happen under what they call the banner of free speech. Well, the problem is it looks like if they picked a side by getting rid of the right, they're in this position now where by allowing the left, it looks like they're on their side. They might have gotten away with it had they have truly been free speech all along. But because they're picking and choosing, just like you said, it seems to me to be highly problematic for the universities. And in fact, I think our higher level institutions, their brands are getting murdered today based upon where they stand. Either one of your view, I'd love to hear it.
I can tell you, Paul, you have no idea how impactful the loss of the Jewish community's support to universities is going to be. And I've been on group letters to college presidents that we're going to pull our donations, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year. We're not taking this lying down, and that to some extent we're putting pressure, the only way we know how, on these heads of institutions to be equanimous, equal with respect to the right and the left. So you're right. But at the core, at the core, whether it's the right or the left, at the core of it is the epidemic right now of mis and disinformation, plain and simple. And the proof, and again, I'm a centrist or an independent, like other people here, but Fox News continued to report that the 2020 election was stolen. And behind the scenes, they were writing text messages and emails to each other saying, nah, it wasn't ever stolen. It's to sell ads. The left, MSNBC and CNN, they do the same thing. They're no longer news shows. They're opinion shows wearing news clothing. And the net effect is that the public gets information that is highly filtered and specially engineered to serve a goal, as opposed to simply report the news. And that's at the core of the problem, because people make up their minds based on flawed information, and they're being sincere. That's one big factor. There's another big factor, but we'll get to it later. But the key of it is the sources of information are not delivering facts. They're delivering opinion couched as facts. And that's very, very destructive and damaging.
Yeah, and one of the largest deliveries of news today is TikTok, which is one of the largest deliveries of news to young people, which, I mean, it sounds like it's hyperbole, but it is true. It is a Chinese Communist Party controlled company. And I've utilized, I put up a couple of posts on TikTok that were anti-Xi. They started to go viral. Immediately, they were stopped. So I utilized, they sent back an email to me saying, well, the reason that we stopped it is because the background you used, you didn't have the copyright to do it. So I had somebody else test it and put up one with a negative comment about Trump and then a negative comment about Biden with the same background. They let it go as far as it wanted to go. They are censoring the news to try to promote the issue that they want. Now, here's what I see being promoted, and this is the question that I want to ask. There's this sense that they're trying to portray Israel as a colonial power. Now, a colonial power basically means you take over an indigenous people and you utilize them and their raw materials to enrich your nation. Right? We did see a colonial period that happened around the world. In fact, you could argue when the British and the United Nations said that this was going to be a homeland to Israel, at that point, the British were really a colonial nation to both groups. But I think it's important to kind of walk through the facts as to how this actually started. How did we end up here? And why did we end up with the West Bank and Gaza to begin with? And you're good at that history. So I'd just love to hear your version of it.
Okay, so first things first. In 1917, Lord Balfour issued a declaration that talked about the formation of a Jewish state in the Middle East. At that time, there was no such place as Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. They were all part of the Ottoman Empire. They didn't exist. There was no Palestine, no Syria, no Lebanon. And then, after the First World War, Britain and France drew lines and said, herein lies Syria, herein lies Iraq, herein lies Iran, herein lies Lebanon, okay? And they left, again, in the 20s, they left Israel as sort of an ambiguous, amorphic thing. Fine. Then, after the Second World War and 6 million Jews were murdered, the world had sympathy and created a Jewish state. And had there been a Jewish state under Balfour at the time of Nazi Germany, a vast majority of those Jews could have emigrated to Israel and saved their lives, including my grandfather and 5 of my aunts and uncles who were murdered. So in 1948, the United Nations explicitly established Israel as a Jewish state. It had the support of international law and the principal global organization. That was not acceptable to the Arab world, and so they attacked to try to destroy the fledgling state of Israel. One problem.
1948.
One problem. Israel beat the tar out of them. And so Israel established itself as a permanent place. We can talk about displacing Palestinians, fair comment, okay? But just so you know, your listeners know, it's about 800,000 Palestinians fled primarily to Lebanon, to Jordan, and some to Lebanon. But 700,000 Jews were expelled from Arab and Muslim countries at the same time. They got no reparations, they got no accommodation, but they were able to go to Israel, and that's where most of them went. So, from a contextual standpoint, Israel is a lawful state. Crimea was annexed by the Russians, has never been sanctioned, and the level of outcry is far, far less. Why? Well, I don't want to answer that because that indicates too much of my point of view. And by the way, historically, when countries engage in war and take over land, they don't return it. They don't return it. They keep it. Let's talk about America. What reparations have we paid to the American Indians, the Native Americans, whose land we stole? I'm not saying we shouldn't have stolen it, but we did. Where is the outcry? In other words, when it comes to Jews in Israel, there is a myriad of double standards. So Israel is held to a standard that is inconsistent with every other country on the planet. And that's fine. Just leave us alone. Keep your opinion. So does that answer your question?
I think it does. Emily, you were about to ask a question, I think.
Yeah, well, I was going to go back to the university, but now I want to stay on this topic. Maybe I'll ask it afterwards. So this is such an important topic, and I think probably there are more questions than we may have answers. And my parents had also benefited from the state of Israel having been developed after being persecuted as Jews in Iraq, and escaped and went to Israel in 1971 and 1973. I think the question that so many people are asking right now is, why is there such a prolific history of anti-Semitism? What is it about the Jewish population that incite this like vehement hate? And that you see it on both sides, on the radical right and the radical left. It's like no matter what we do, it's always going to be criticized. Whether we're challenging white superiority because we're an immigrant, or because we're seen as colonizers by the left and oppressors. It's like no matter what, there's always this level of anti-Semitism. And I see this also in the forensic work that I do in terms of radical ideologies and extremism, that so many of them, when you go to the root of it, is born from anti-Semitism, or there's this link that is driving this hate and resentment that is anti-Semitic. And so I think it's a valid question. Why is the world so critical of Jews? Why is there so much hatred towards Jews? And why are Jews held to a different level of standard that I mean, the rhetoric is even permitting what Hamas did and the massacres that they committed on October 7th, saying that they were in the right and they were justified to kill babies and families, none of whom had any weapons and were totally defenseless, but because Israel deserved it. And so it just, I question it. We're going to be talking to the rabbi soon next week. And, I think maybe there's some spiritual answers. Maybe there's some psychological answers. Maybe there's historical, contextual, political answers that we can look at this. I'd love to know your thoughts on it.
Okay, well, anti-Semitism has many, many roots. There's no conclusive statement as to why, but it exists. And by the way, much of it is based on false facts. Okay, so the first thing is in the Old Testament, the Jews were chosen. The Israelites actually is what they were not referred to as Jews in the Old, but the Israelites were God's chosen people. Whether that's true or not, that's what's written. That's number one. Number two, there's a rumor, I'm saying it's a rumor, that the Jews murdered Christ. Okay? First of all, Christ was an observant Jew. He was a Reformed Jew. He had a different perception of how the priesthood should work. And so he was a protester in effect, but a Jew. He was murdered by the Romans. Yes, the Jews identified where he was. They were collaborators, but they didn't murder it. But that created what's known as the blood libel. And that blood libel permeates in other manifestations. For example, among certain people, there's a perception that the Passover matzah requires Christian baby blood. It's inconceivable that people would even think of this. My parents were from Poland. 2 million Polish Jews were murdered by the Nazis. But in 1946, a group of brigands in the town of Kelsey in Poland ran into the town, committed a pogrom, and killed 52 observant Jews. 2 million dead Jews was not enough for the Poles. So, Emily, you're a psychiatrist, psychologist?
Psychologist. Mm-hmm.
Psychologist. The human mind is extremely complex, okay? And what motivates people to do what they do sometimes is completely irrational. But as far as I can see, the way to combat it is to engage in active education, which is what we're trying to do at Stand With Us and my other communal involvements. We have to educate people. So does that answer your question? It's not a solution. The root cause of anti-Semitism has never been scientifically identified. So we don't know. We can just speculate.
Let me put out my theory on it. And I'd love to hear what both of you think and whether you think I might be off base on this. First, I think that there are Jewish cultural issues that seem to me that exist wherever Jewish people are. All right, here's a starting point. About the time of Jesus, literally the Jewish religion, the Jewish population had about 100% literacy. They all had to be able to read portions of the Torah. Very highly literate society. Second, their ties to their ancestors are very strong from from a Torah and a Talmud standpoint. And those stories, what I find fascinating about them is they're not always about heroes. Like if you listen to the story of Jacob, I mean, Jacob deceived his father, stole his bloodline, stole his mother, and he did all these deceptive things. But the thing about Jacob in the story was he finds a woman that he loves, and he has to work 7 years to be able to get her. And then, of course, his father-in-law tricks him, gives him another woman, and he has to work another 7 years. When he gets done working the 14 years, he's really good at being a shepherd. He knows which sheep are the right sheep. He's very industrious. The stories over and over again talk about prosperity, and prosperity is not seen as a bad thing. It's seen as a positive thing, as a way to have some self-agency. You go around the world, and overwhelmingly in every society, Jews tend to be a more prosperous society. I'm not talking about the individuals, and I'm not trying to do anything like the elders of Zion or anything else. But as a society, they work hard, they're literate, they focus on prosperity, they're willing to invest multi-generationally, not just for one generation, but for many, many generations. Now, you take that into Europe, where in many cases the other societies didn't do as well. And all of a sudden, there's a victim mentality. And the victim mentality says, wait a minute, if you're doing better than me, you must have done something that cheated me. You must have done something that stole from me. You must have taken that from me. Otherwise, I would have it, and you wouldn't, right? And so the answer becomes, it's a power issue. The view of power becomes, hey, I'm the oppressed, and you're the oppressor, as opposed to saying, hey, let me have that book that you're reading. I want to see what it is that's in that book that seems to help you guys, regardless of where it is that you go. It becomes an issue that's somehow or another I got ripped off. I think what's going on with young people today is they are effectively, they're coming out of schools and colleges, and oftentimes they're young people, so they feel oppressed. And their version of power is very simple. I'm the oppressed, I'm a victim, and there's an oppressor. And in this particular case, I see a bomb and I see a dead child, and it's immediate. I'm going to apply who I think the oppressor is and who I think the oppressed is. But I think the Jews suffer that over and over again. And I think in Israel today, there's incredible prosperity. I mean, Israel is doing very, very well. I think good news for Israel is, while we're seeing this on college campuses, I think the whole world is fed up with Hezbollah and Hamas. I think even in most of the Arab world, they're fed up with Hezbollah and Hamas. The United States is fed up with it. Europe is fed up with it. They're not getting sympathy from the mainstream people in each society. Now, that doesn't mean we're not giving a lot of exposure to the radical left or the radical right, who seem to be on the other side. But I think that the anti-Semitism partly comes from a cultural issue that's been very helpful to the Jewish community in helping them prosper from a multi-generational standpoint. I'd love to have both your thoughts on that.
So I'll give you a non-scientific answer, and that is that the human psychology requires scapegoats. There has to be some reason why my life is so bad. It's not because I'm lazy or stupid or whatever. It's because of these other people. And the Jews are an insular minority. They are highly successful, as you point out, as a peoplehood. There's obviously members who are not. We have homeless people too, that we try to take care of. But we coalesce around each other and we create community, and that's something that is largely absent outside today. It's present in part in the African American churches. They create community for their people, but in very few other places is there this profound sense of community, and that therefore creates jealousy, frustration, etc., among the people who see this group continue to progress. That's the best I can give you. My other theory is that anti-Semitism is built into the DNA of human beings, but there's no science for that. That's just me spitballing.
Emily, any thoughts on your own?
Yes, yeah. I think, some of the questions that I've always grappled with is, hearing on the other side people's argument that they resent that the Jews have this sense of elitism, that they refer to themselves as the chosen people. And that view is seen as having a superiority complex over others. Um, and and I think you're right. I think that we need to find some way to promote some kind of education in really helping people to understand we are survivalists. And it wasn't that long ago. We never had a place to defend. We only had a people to defend. We're fortunate we now have a land to defend that we can call a homeland. But prior to that, it was ingrained. I mean, talking about DNA, it was ingrained in the teachings that you may have to uproot your life at any given moment and time, because historically we are part of a diaspora, and all we have for survival is really our tribe, our family, and this is our legacy. And so it became so much part of our survival that, maybe don't invest in buying property where you live, but invest in educating yourself, because that's transferable. Putting money into things that you can take with you. And I think, just on this show, we have a Jewish doctor and a Jewish lawyer. We fit the stereotypes. But
I'm feeling oppressed all of a sudden.
you're an ally. We share a daughter.
So let me interject some facts here. That again, and I spoke with President Herzog in May of this year, face to face. I was in Israel for a program, and I said to him, Israel has to invest $500 million to $1 billion in a global marketing campaign to tell the real story. Israel does a horrible job of telling the story.
I agree.
Let me share. There are 15 million Jews identified as Jews living on this planet. That is less than 0.2% of the total population of the world. How dominant can we be? 0.2%. Next. Israel has about 8 million people. Beautiful. A Jewish state. There's probably north of 1 billion people who live in Muslim theocracies. Double standard. Why can't there be a Jewish state? There's all these Islamic states. Again, facts, okay? Those are facts. Historically, as I said, this area was all part of the Ottoman Empire from about 1200 going forward, so almost for 700 years before Israel was formed. There's no peoplehood. It doesn't exist. Palestine didn't exist. Lebanon didn't exist. Syria didn't exist until the British in 1917 came out, the British and the French in 22 decided to draw lines. And they did a miserable job of it because, and Emily, this is consistent with what you're talking about, in the Muslim world, it is profoundly tribal, okay? So you have my clan, your clan, Paul's clan. I had dinner with Danny Ayalon, who was the Israeli ambassador to the UN, face to face like this. And I said, why don't you just draw a line? How tough is that? He says, we could do it in 1 minute. He said, but here's the problem. the West Bank is not ruled by the Palestinian Authority. That's nominal. It's ruled by the 380 plus clans that comprise the West Bank. So who do we do a deal with? Okay, it's very clannish, all right, which again, I don't see a problem with that until you ignore that and say we're not like those other people across the river. They're as tribal as we are. It's just they do it differently, and that's okay. It's a big world.
All right, so Marty, help me answer this question because I'm asked this a lot. The question is, it sounds something along this line, that the Palestinians were the indigenous people of Israel, and the Israelis came in, whether they were allowed in by the United Nations or not, and they displaced the indigenous people from their land. How would you answer that if you were talking to people who asked that question today?
I do. So first of all, this was Judea and Sumeria, which are what Israel is today, were part of the Jewish Israelite people from before the time of Christ. And after the Romans expelled the Israelites from the area and brought them to Rome to build the Colosseum as slaves, which they did, many people, a small number but enough, stayed in Jerusalem and stayed in Israel and maintained a permanent presence. So, and again, the facts are murky, but let's agree that the Israelites, the Israelis, expelled 800,000 people from their indigenous land. Okay, I'll concede that fact. I don't agree with it, but I'll concede it. An equal number of people were expelled from Arab and Muslim countries. Where is the equality there? Okay, and this is not a confirmed fact, but I heard this, so you guys can research it or dismiss it. But Israel announced a program to the Palestinian Jordanians and said, come to Israel, show us the bona fides that you were the landowner, and we will pay you reparations. Fair. Maybe, maybe not. Jordan said, if you go to Israel, Jordan's leadership said, if you go to Israel to collect your reparations, you're not permitted to return to Jordan. Where is Arab Brotherhood? The same thing happened with Sinai. Israel conquered the Sinai in 1967 when it was attacked by 5 Arab states. In 1982, it agreed to return Sinai to Egypt in exchange for a peace treaty. Wonderful. But the Egyptians, notwithstanding the fact that Gaza is part of the Sinai and had been part of Egypt for millennia, Egypt said, you know what, we don't really want Gaza. You keep it, you deal with them. Just the Arab world knows that the Gazans are trouble. Not Gazans, the Gazan leadership. The Gazans are fine people. Nobody has an issue with them. But unfortunately, they're living in a similar world to Nazi Germany in 1935. Only they're not wearing brown shirts anymore. They're wearing balaclavas, okay? And so if you oppose anything in Gaza, you're signing your own death sentence. And that's a fact. Go research it to the nth degree. Okay, so there's not equivalency. And there's this perception, which I absolutely love. There's this perception among the left primarily that Israel is Goliath and the Palestinian people are David. It's exactly the opposite. Okay, 8 million to 1 billion. That's not David and Goliath. That's Goliath and David. So the problem is people are selectively excluding, analyzing facts, and they're not. This is an epidemic we have. Forget the anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. The absence of critical thinking in our society, in our world today, is at epidemic stages. And until people are prepared to critically think, and critical thinking involves a key component, which is you have to consider the source. You get this story, you have to consider the source. So let's go back to Fox News. They promoted a stolen election. But if you know the way Fox News works, you're going to critically analyze that. You're going to critically analyze that. And you're going to say, well, wait a minute, maybe we ought to just take a step back and look at it. And just to add insult to injury, people now form opinions. They believe they formed the opinion on facts. Okay, and this is why I have this opinion. Well, first of all, their opinion is unfiltered facts. It doesn't involve any independent research on their part. And here's the proof. Oh, and whatever you offer them as facts, they discount and discredit and ignore. I watched a YouTube video yesterday of a guerrilla reporter, a young guy, and he was at a MAGA rally, and he was talking to a MAGA guy. And he said, let me read something to you. And he read a statement. And he said, this is what Biden says. What do you have to say about that? And the guy said, that's idiotic. That's ridiculous. That's a lie. You can't say that. And he said, oh, I made a mistake. Let me show you. This is on Truth Social. This is a post that Donald Trump made about himself. And the guy looked at him. When confronted with the facts, he stormed off. And that is the epidemic that we're combating and dealing with today. The inability of people to acknowledge that maybe they have it wrong. And Paul, I told you the story about my brother the other day and me. I don't know if you want me to retell it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was 3 years old, and my first earliest memory is of being on the ER table with a broken collarbone. My older brother flipped me over his head and broke my collarbone. And for 60 years, I told the following story. My brother said, the guy upstairs taught me this new trick. He's told me to stick out my foot. I stuck out my foot and he threw me over his head, and that broke my collarbone. 60 years. If I had taken a lie detector test, I would have passed. And then I was at a dinner with my brother and some other people, and I told the story. He goes, that's not what happened. I go, what do you mean? He said, you lost your temper. You tried to kick me, and I grabbed your foot and threw you, and it broke your collarbone. And I took a step back, and I remembered who I was as a child. And I was a kid with a horrible temper. I used to break tennis rackets. I was a competitive tennis player. When I would get mad, I'd break tennis rackets. I'd break baseball bats. I'd fight with people. I had a horrible temper until I was about 18. Horrible. And then it dawned on me, for 60 years, I had the facts dead wrong. Dead wrong. And that's critical thinking, meaning you have to take a step back from your perception of reality, and you have to see if there's another view or other views. And so until our society is prepared to table their lie detector certainty and be open to hearing the other side, not walking away, we're not going to move forward.
All right, I'm going to come back to this facts in a minute, but I have to tell my brother's story. So I was mayor of Phoenix. I had left, I don't know, about a year after I had left. I have a number of brothers. I'm the oldest of 9. And one of my younger brothers was building a giant infrastructure program through the city of Phoenix. He's digging a big old ditch. Actually, a couple of my brothers were working on it. And they were pulling a fiber optics lines for fiber optic companies. It went through a very important area. And in any event, late at night, 2 a.m, an inspector came up, got mad at my brother and said, "Hey, what you're doing, I'm not happy with it. I'm going to shut the job down." So my younger brother, who was a gunny in the Marine Corps, tough guy, comes out of the ditch. He goes, "Hey, listen, I need to have this ditch closed up by tomorrow. If I don't have this ditch closed up, not only is it going to cause a traffic problem, but somebody could end up getting killed in this. I really need to be able to close that up." He says, "I don't care. I'm closing it up." So he basically tells the inspector, "Go screw yourself," jumps back in the ditch. So the inspector calls a police officer. Police officer comes and sees that he won't get out. So the police officer calls me because he knew me, right, from being the mayor. So I come down to the job site, and sure enough, my brother's down in the ditch. And I says, "John, come on out. We need to talk." He jumps out of the ditch, pushes me. I swing at him. Next thing you know, he and I are fisticuffs down in the mud, rolling around. I mean, we are just wailing away at each other. Finally, after we exhaust each other, I don't know, we're probably 40 at the time, we stand back up. We're totally covered with mud. And the police officer then says to the inspector, "Okay, do you want me to shut the job down?" And the inspector says, "Actually," he says, "I think that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life." He goes, I've never seen a mayor get into a fist fight before." He said, "Go ahead and let him finish the job." So I think there's a power issue to that story, every bit as much as there's a truth portion to that story. But here's my question on the truth side of it. So we hear these facts, like people, one of the things I hear bantered around all the time is Israel is an apartheid state.
Oh.
Now, of course, the problem with that is if you live in Israel proper, you have all the same civil rights that as a Muslim that someone that was Jewish would have, which seems to say to me that it's not a racial issue. And apartheid is defined as a country that implements policies based upon a racial standard. So let's talk about that one for a minute. Emily or Martin. Martin, I'll start with you. You know, let's deal with that one fact.
Well, let's start from the beginning. Apartheid was originally a racial separation, but it's taken on greater definition, broader. So now it includes not just racial. And by the way, what's happening in Israel, they're not different races. Okay, so if apartheid is about race, it can't possibly apply to Israel. But let's talk about that. In Israel, women, LGBTQ people, African Americans, Palestinian, Israeli Arabs have equal rights under the law with very minor issues. And even now, it's gotten better. Palestinian Israelis can serve in the IDF, in the military. In Saudi Arabia, can women drive? Can they?
Nope.
Do they have to wear headscarves? Can they go? Forget Saudi Arabia. In Iran, can women go out on the street on their own by themselves, or do they have to be accompanied by a man? If you're gay in one of those places, are you persecuted or are you given absolute freedom and full rights? If we want to talk, again, this is the double standard that is prevalent when dealing with Israel. The apartheid states are all of the other countries. Israel has Palestinians in its parliament, in their leadership body. I think there might be one Jew in the Iranian some body, but generally there's no Jews in any of their governmental bodies. Let's talk, let's have a real conversation about apartheid, because that's a catchphrase. It has meaning, but it's been hijacked and it's been misapplied. It's not an apartheid state. It's not.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, just as you point out, it's amazing how very few people are protesting for what's happening in China with the Uyghurs. Very few people are protesting for what's happening in the Middle East, where they persecute women or where they persecute gays. But when it comes to Israel, they're held to a much higher standard. So here's kind of my theory that I want to talk about just for a moment, and it's this whole idea of a two-state solution. I think I support the two-state solution, but it's not lost on me that literally hundreds of billions of dollars have flown into both the West Bank and to Gaza from all over the world. And specifically in Gaza, the one thing that's become clear is they've received more money from around the world than literally any refugee group ever. It's obvious that was being spent on digging tunnels and buying missiles and buying bombs and arming themselves, as opposed to feeding their people and looking for prosperity. The issue that concerns me is I don't have any doubt Gaza could be one of the wealthiest places in the world. I mean, you look at it, it's beautiful oceanfront. It has all different types of natural resources, and they have 2 million people. And by the way, it's a mistake to believe these people aren't educated. We've spent a lot of money trying to help educate them in Gaza. So the real issue is they don't have the fundamentals. To me, the fundamentals are this: civil rights, equal rights, human rights, meaning you create more buyers and sellers. Number two, property rights. You'll be able to own what it is that you create. Third, you have a court system that can ensure that those rights are protected. Now, that's how you create prosperity. What I find with authoritarians is that prosperity is never as important as power. Power is the key. And all those institutions that it takes to protect the ability to grow, which Israel has, the United States has, most Western liberal democracies have, in a heartbeat, a Hamas would overthrow them. They wouldn't allow them to exist. To me, if you're going to have a two-state solution, we're just going to end up going back to Hamas unless we have some ability to ensure that those institutions that promote freedom, that promote prosperity, have a chance to survive. That's how we did it in Japan. All right, we sent MacArthur there. MacArthur implemented a whole series of processes, but it took 20 years for that to be successful. And I think if we're just going to give them a two-state solution and walk away, we're actually going to end up being right back to where we are today. Thoughts from either one of you?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's hard to see this through, but I think no matter what, Hamas needs to be replaced. Like there's just no way for them to continue, and I think it's so discouraging and disheartening to hear Americans say, well, Hamas is representative Palestinians, and they're an oppressed people, but yet when you look at the funding and the money and the connections and the power and all those resources that are actually taken away from Palestinians, how that actually hurts them. I agree with you. I think that it's necessary for Hamas to be replaced. Recently it was interesting. I had just learned that Palestinians who live in Jordan, they have a special stamp inside of their passport that they're labeled as the sons of Gaza. And it denies them certain rights and privileges, like they can't work within the government. They're denied certain basic rights, and forever, seen as separate from Jordanians, even though they hold a Jordanian passport. So it's so fascinating to see, like, okay, so Palestinians who are Muslim and Arab should be the responsibility of the Jews to protect and provide for. and yet like the Arab brothers don't want them, are not helping them, are oppressing them, and yet Israel just keeps being the person to blame. But I agree with you, Paul. I think a two-state solution is probably going to be more beneficial in the long term, and I think the international community should support having a just political reform, and the extermination of Hamas.
Marty?
Well, these are deep questions. In 1980, Clinton, Barack, and Arafat met to try to create a peace deal. And the facts are a little bit murky, but Barack agreed to either 94 or 97.
By the way, this is 1990, right?
Not
Not
yes, yes,
1980,
it's
right?
2000.
90 was the Oslo
It's
Accords.
2000, just before Clinton
Okay.
stopped being president. Okay.
All right.
And he, Arafat, and Ehud Barak, not Barack Obama, Ehud Barak, met at Camp David for a week or so. And Ehud Barak offered either 94 or 97% of the West Bank. Paul, you're a businessman. If you get 94 or 97% of what you ask for, you race to get your pen and sign it. Arafat said no, everything or nothing. Okay. So first of all, there's no interest in a peaceful resolution. Why? Why? Because if it's unstable, the leadership of the West Bank and Gaza and Lebanon get tons of money from the UN, from European nations, from Iran, from Saudi Arabia. Tons, I'm talking billions of dollars, couched, clothed in, it's for schools, hospitals, and mosques. But very little of that money has ever been used for that. It either lines the pockets of the leadership or it's used to acquire weapons. Okay. Second, the Palestinians in the West Bank have a policy. They may have changed it recently, but they had a policy. If you engage in a terrorist act in Israel and you die, we'll pay your family every month a fee. So there is an incentive to be disruptive. Okay? That's number two. All right? And then, as I said, Gaza was part of Egypt. They didn't want any part of it. Oh, and then the final thing I want to say is this notion of equivalency. Wait a minute. They only killed 1,400 people, and you've already killed civilians of 10,000 civilians. So let's put some perspective on this. The United States had 3,200 Americans on American soil murdered in 9/11. What was our reaction? We destroyed Iraq and Afghanistan. We spent years fighting them. Nobody condemned us for that formally. Israel lost 1,400 people, which is the equivalent of 30,000 Americans. Imagine how we would react if someone from Colombia, a cartel, came up and killed 30,000 Americans in Phoenix. Do you think we would we'll just go to Colombia and kill 30,000 people? What we would do is we would carpet bomb Colombia until it became a desert. There's no, the equivalency is unfortunately, it's a left-wing term that has no true meaning. Equivalency. 150 or so people were kidnapped. We don't know what's happened to them yet. Imagine if Israel went into Gaza and took 150 Gazans out of Gaza and announced to the world, we have hostages. Imagine the sanctions Israel would be receiving. Again, there's double standard and no equivalency. Unfortunately, college professors, high school teachers, left-wing types, and some far-right-wing types, they don't care about that. They don't care about the facts. They just care about their point of view. And to the extent you show us facts that are contrary to our point of view, we're going to walk away just like that guy did. So we have a very, very difficult problem because people are not open. They're not open to changing their minds. And one last thing about Israel and peace. Israel is committed to peace. I'll give you an example. Okay? When the Sinai was returned to Egypt, Gaza had 8,000 Israelis who were settlers in Gaza. They owned businesses, greenhouses worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When Israel made that deal, it told those settlers, you have to leave Gaza. And they said, no, we don't want to leave. Israel sent in their military and removed 8,000 people and brought them to Israel proper against their will. Let's talk about a commitment to peace. And then let's talk about the Gazans' response to having Israelis eradicated from their land. They went to the greenhouses and businesses and destroyed them. Businesses that could have been very helpful to the Gazan economy. Where's the outrage over that? And if you read the Hamas charter, it says, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just like it obliterated others before it. Read it. Don't take my word for it. How do you deal with people like that? And I have an old college buddy, an African American. He's a physician. He's a very bright guy. He's also very left-wing, and we've had friendly debates about this. And he said, well, Israel's an occupier and blah, blah, blah. I said, John, let me ask, he lives in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I said, let me ask you a question. If your next door neighbor had two spectacular teenage boys, they mowed your lawn, they took your groceries, they washed your car, never asked for a dime. Great kids. But their father was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. You being African American, you would be targeted. Every weekend, people come to the home, they throw beer bottles into your garage, into your backyard. They knock down your fences. And on Monday, when you go to drive to work, your tires have been slashed. How are you going to react to that? And his reaction was, this conversation's over. But the fact of the matter is, Israel is living next door on all three sides, because the ocean's on the fourth side, to Klansmen, people whose mission is to destroy them. How do you deal with that? And Emily, you're right. Hamas has to be replaced, but it's a power play, and it's not. The Gazan people cannot do this on their own, because anyone who opposes these people are going to end up in a box. So it's a catch-22 for the poor Gazan people, for the people of Lebanon, for the Palestinians on the West Bank. It's a catch-22 for them. They need a state, but they can't get it because their leadership won't allow it. So what do? You coexist. And Paul, to answer your question, what should happen is exactly what happened with Israel. The UN in 1947-48 said, here's where the line is. This is Israel, this is Jordan, this is Lebanon, this is Egypt. But the UN should do that again with the Palestinian state. But there's a wrinkle. They should commit to putting peacekeepers all along the borders so that there were independent third parties who can see who started the conflict, okay, who saw the missiles coming over from Gaza. And then Israel's response, which is aggressive. But again, their mission is to eliminate Hamas and not to coexist with it. But if you want a two-state solution, that's how you have to do it. And the UN can draw the lines wherever it wants. And if the people on the ground don't like it, they can take up arms and they can fight and try to conquer whatever land they want. But there are consequences to that, and they have to be aware of that. This is not about David and Goliath. The truth is, the world doesn't want to solve the Middle East because it could do it like that. They don't want to, okay, because then they'd have to deal with other problems. UNRWA, which is the refugee agency of the UN, has one client for the last 75 years, one refugee group that they serve, the Palestinians. They don't do anything for the people in the Sudan, the Hutus and the Tutsis who annihilated each other. They're not there for the Ukrainians or the Crimeans. They're not there for any of that. They're not there for the Uyghurs. They're not there for the people in Tibet who are persecuted by the Chinese. Let's go down the list. So again, I don't have a solution for you, but what I can do is say, you better look at the double standard and take a hard, critical look at it, and then form your opinion.
You know, it's a, so I'll give you some areas I agree with you on, and then one, I don't know if it's a disagreement, but it's certainly an area that I have a strong thought on. And that's the issue of disagreement, potential disagreement, is the importance of winning the peace. You know, we lost the war in Vietnam, but I think we won the peace. I mean, it's amazing how we've built a great relationship with Vietnam since that war. On the other hand, we absolutely won the war in Afghanistan, but we lost the peace. Long term, our policy wasn't going to be able to sustain itself. And so it doesn't mean that Americans were bad because we lost it. It means that we hadn't thought through what was going to work for us. Now, areas of agreement. There is, to call this an apartheid state, that is simply propaganda that you're utilizing. And because it's propaganda, it sounds anti-Semitic to me. Calling Israel a colonial nation, it's so far off the definition of it. I don't care if it is a United Nations member that's using it. It sounds anti-Semitic to me. I also believe that that what we're seeing on our college campuses amongst our extreme right and our extreme left, while it's absurd, I think overwhelmingly most Americans on both the right and the left are supportive of Israel. In fact, I think most people throughout Europe, I think even if you look deep into the Arab world, take Iran out of the picture, while people feel bad about innocent Palestinians being killed, which is legitimate, I think they have no desire to take over Gaza or the West Bank. They recognize the problems that are there. I do believe somehow or another we have to find a way to win the peace. And the only way that you can win the peace, in my view, is you have to find a way to bring them back to prosperity. And I'm positive of this. The hundreds of billions of dollars that they've been given from people around the world, it will never work. In fact, the guy who gained the biggest benefit from that is literally the leader of Hamas, who doesn't live in Gaza. He lives in Qatar in a home on the ocean, and he's a billionaire. The answer is he's doing very well. Now, we have to cut off Hamas completely, and that's going to be hard, just like it was doing ISIS, just like it was in dealing with al-Qaeda. It is not going to be done debt-free. Israel, I support them going in and doing what they're doing. I just want them to get it done as quick as they can while preserving life as best they can. And I believe they want to do that. I genuinely do. But what's more important is they need to get it done. They need to get those ditches. They need to get the tunnels figured out. They need to figure out where their weaponry is. They need to destroy that weaponry. And then we need to go beyond it. We need to destroy their financial ability to get money to Hamas and to people like that, because they're only going to spend it on building more weapons. And we can do that. What we figured out with the Russians, with SWIFT and other things, there's a role that we can play in trying to stop money illegally flowing to places that it shouldn't flow. But in the end, we're going to have to figure out how to try to make this place prosperous. And the downside to that is I don't think you can do it by just giving them their own independent state. This is about creating a constitution or a set of rules. It's about creating a rule of law. It's about creating a court system that protects people, regardless of whether they're women or gay or of a different religion. And more importantly, that protects people's right to own what they create, to be able to own property so that a free market can flourish. We're not going to do that simply by telling them to do it. It's going to take a more interactive role, and I think that we're going to have to be willing to play it if we want to try to create a long-term solution here that doesn't just come right back to where we are today.
So, Paul, I think you're actually onto something. So the first step is to, in effect, neuter Hamas. Okay, that has to happen because they're brown shirts. They're the equivalent for the Gazan people as the Nazis were for Germany. So the gang needs to be either eliminated or neutered. But then, and you're right about creating a functioning society, Israel and the world needs to create the equivalent of a Marshall Plan for the Palestinians, just like we did for Japan and Europe. And look at them today. Trust me, if the Marshall Plan hadn't been implemented, Europe and Japan would still be in a hole because the cost of the war was generational in terms of the damage that it did. And the Marshall Plan, in effect, rebirthed enterprise in those countries. So if we can effectively neuter Hamas, and again, the Marshall Plan, it wasn't us just writing checks. Our military stayed in Europe and still is in Europe 75 years later, 78 years later, okay? And maybe that has to happen. And a lot of Gazans won't like the fact that Israelis or American soldiers are on their territory, but let them then earn the right to be truly free. And this is a thing that's important, what I'm about to say, not just to the Gazans and the Palestinians and the Israelis. This is directed at Americans. We've forgotten that freedom involves work. You have to work at it. Okay, so that means you have to dedicate each of us has a duty to the country, to our communities, to each other, to do the right thing, to provide support, to volunteer, to join the military, the Peace Corps, Project Hope, Tennessee Valley Authority, doesn't matter. But everybody has to do. In Israel, when you're 18, you have to do 2 years of military service. You don't have an option. The only exception.
It's actually for males, too, for
okay,
females.
And it doesn't, but this is going to change, but it doesn't apply to the ultra-Orthodox Jewish young people. And that's a bad thing. But that has to change. But putting that aside, if you talk to Israelis, they are so profoundly patriotic. Well, why is that? Because they invested in the country. And in America today, our young people don't invest in the country at all. And until that changes here in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Crimea, doesn't matter where. If you're not invested, then you're entitled. And if you're entitled, it doesn't matter. If you lose it, you gain it, you don't care. And if and if you do lose it, you get radically militant because the benefits of this open society are no longer available to you. And so you take up arms to promote your point of view. But until people are investing in their communities, forget their nations, just their communities, spend 2 years working in a food bank. Do you know how that will change the way you see the world? It would be radical. Fine, you don't want to be in the military? Join the Peace Corps and see how people live in Uganda. You come home with a different point of view. And until we're all ready to do that, we're destined to remain in these kinds of conflicts, because that, in the long run, is the ultimate solution, in my view.
All right. Well, you're right. We belong to something bigger. I love that. And we'll use that to end the show. Marty, thanks so much for being with us today. Good luck to your organization, and we appreciate you taking part. Dr. Bastian, thanks for being here as well.
No, Paul and Emily, thank you, seriously, for giving me a platform. It means the world to me, and I owe you both big time. So that can either be in the podcast or edit it out, but I owe you a debt of gratitude. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for being with us on this show. You know, Martin did a great job of talking about what's happening inside the Middle East. One of the things that's not lost on me is that there were divisions that were going on in Israel. And I think in great part it was because of the prosperity that they were having. Those divisions were in everything from their Supreme Court to dealing with the challenges between the rival parties. And then all of a sudden, one day they woke up and found that the external threat was much greater than they ever imagined. In the United States, I would tell you, I think the same is true. We still have big external threats, and we're allowing very, very small divisions in the United States to divide us. That's why we're here at The Optimistic American. It's to try and help renew the American spirit. It's to try and help bridge the divisions that exist between us. And I happen to think the best way to do that is, as best we can, to let people know about what's going on the issues. Thanks for being with us. This is Paul Johnson with The Optimistic American. Thanks for joining The Optimistic American show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned, and we can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.